Imagine waking up one day and realizing that every voice, every familiar rhythm of your life, the buzzing phone, the background chatter, the endless stream of notifications, has gone silent. No one calls, no one checks in. The world carries on with its noise and chaos, but you, somehow, are cut adrift. In that quiet, it hits you. You are not just alone, you are lonely. Loneliness slips in quietly, like a shadow at the edge of a room. It does not always arrive with dramatic door slams or tear-streaked faces. Sometimes it lives inside the laughter at parties, in the scroll through social feeds, in the ritual smile you give to colleagues you barely know. It reveals itself in contrast, like tasting bitterness only because sweetness once touched your tongue. Have you noticed this contradiction? You can be surrounded by people, entire throngs of them, yet feel as if no one truly sees you. And you can also be cut off in solitude, yet feel profoundly whole. Here lies the paradox no one really wants to sit with. Why is it that loneliness, the very thing we're most desperate to escape, may be the one thing we most desperately need? Why does the weight of isolation feel unbearable, yet hold within it a secret doorway, one that only those who dare to face it can cross? We spend so much of our lives fleeing. We chase companionship, entertainment, distraction, anything to drown out those bare, echoing chambers inside. But what if loneliness isn't an enemy to be defeated, but a teacher, bearing a lesson we've been avoiding? What if this strange emptiness is not absence, but invitation? Think about it. Human beings evolved as social creatures. Our nervous systems were shaped around survival in groups. Our minds are attuned to the smiles, frowns, embraces, and rejections of others. To be cast out from connection triggers the same primal alarms as physical pain. Yet despite this, countless poets, philosophers, and mystics through history have exalted solitude. They vanished into forests, deserts, mountain cells, not because they sought punishment, but because they discovered some radical clarity in being alone. Might it be that the very sensation we recoil from like fire is in fact the forge in which truth is born? Consider the raw contradictions within loneliness itself. It is unbearable, and yet it produces the deepest forms of self-discovery. It isolates you from the world, but reveals the hidden architecture of your mind. It feels like slow suffocation, yet for some, it becomes the air of spiritual awakening. This is the great question buried inside loneliness. Is it our cruelest affliction or our greatest teacher? Loneliness forces us to stare at the unadorned self, without costumes, roles, or external affirmations. Who are you when nobody is watching? Are you anything at all without reflection in another's eyes? If identity requires recognition, then what remains when recognition vanishes? Do you drift into nothingness, or meet something more enduring than any applause could give? There is a terrifying honesty to loneliness. In silence, the masks begin to slip. The image you've curated for the world, how clever you are, how desirable, how competent and strong, all that begins to blur. And beneath it, you may find raw fear, fear of being meaningless, fear of living a life no one witnesses, fear of being forgotten before you are even gone. But here's the riddle. Doesn't this very fear point to the possibility that meaning isn't merely given by others? Doesn't the ache for recognition suggest that you yourself hold a hidden reservoir of meaning, one untouched by crowds or consensus? If loneliness exposes your fragility, could it not also reveal your unshakable core? Imagine for a moment that loneliness is not a sign you are broken, but rather a call to step into a deeper dimension of existence. That its sharp edge, rather than killing you, cuts through the noise to expose the real. What if the pang is not punishment, but initiation? A door into yourself that only silence can open. The question then expands into something even more haunting. Are we so terrified of loneliness, not because it starves us, but because it shows us truths we can't unsee? Perhaps what we fear most is not being alone with nothing, but being alone with ourselves. And so, Loneliness emerges as one of the strangest paradoxes of human life. It tastes like exile, but may signify arrival. It looks like emptiness, but may conceal foundation. It hurts like death, but may whisper of rebirth. Between the hunger for others and the discovery of self lies this razor's edge. The stage is set then, for an uncomfortable but essential journey. The question before us is not simply, why does loneliness hurt? But rather, why does it teach? And if it really is a teacher, then what is it trying to show us? About who we are, about what we've lost, and about what might still await us when we dare to linger in its unsettling presence. As we step further, the silence will deepen, the masks will dissolve. The next step will take us into the hidden roots of this strange companion, the psychological and philosophical forces that make loneliness one of the most dreaded, yet most transformative elements of the human experience. The hidden problem and its psychological, philosophical roots. Word count, 940. At the heart of loneliness lies a hidden fracture, one that has less to do with the absence of other people and more to do with the way the human psyche has been constructed. You may believe you're lonely because friends are distant, family unavailable, or community absent. But if you look closer, you'll notice something unsettling. Loneliness doesn't vanish the moment people arrive. Haven't you sat at a crowded table, smiled through conversation, and still felt that hollow echo in your chest? If loneliness were merely solved by presence, then proximity would cure it. Yet countless relationships exist that are nothing but mirrors reflecting back emptiness. So what is this deeper root? Carl Jung once remarked that loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. The key here is recognition. It's not the sheer volume of eyes upon you, but the piercing quality of being understood. Without that bridge, you might as well be invisible. Jung points to a core truth. Loneliness is not the absence of company, but the absence of communion. But let's peel further. Friedrich Nietzsche, prowling at the edges of societal norms, warned that every act of becoming an individual will carve you out of the herd, and with that carving comes inevitable isolation. For Nietzsche, loneliness arises because to be fully oneself is inherently to step away from the crowd. To walk a path no one else has walked means no one can walk it with you. Are you brave enough then to stand in that solitude? Or do you retreat back into conformity to avoid facing it? Arthur Schopenhauer, in his often brutal honesty, saw loneliness as a direct consequence of human suffering. Each individual is, at bottom, imprisoned in their own consciousness. No matter how much love, empathy, or conversation flows between people, no one can ever directly enter another's mind. There is always a veil between subjectivities. Your pain, no matter how vividly described, will never be fully transferred into another person's body. Loneliness, then, might not be a glitch of society at all, but an unavoidable condition of existence itself. Consider this in modern psychological terms. Each person exists with a private universe. Neuroscience tells us the brain constructs reality, an endless stream of interpretations, projections, and neural codes. What you call the world is really an inner simulation, stitched together by perception and memory. This means each of us lives not in the world, but in our world. If so, loneliness is not simply being without others. It is the felt awareness that my inner world and yours will never perfectly overlap. No matter how close we are, a gap will remain. Yet society tricks us into believing this gap can be erased. The culture of constant social media, brand-curated selves, and eternal connectivity whispers, "You are never alone, because you are always connected." But this is a lie of glitter and plastic. Sartre's existentialism reminds us of the nausea one feels when existence itself becomes visible, stripped of illusions. In endless noise and connection, one still feels lonely, perhaps more lonely, because deeper meaning is deferred into the shallow exchange of likes, comments, and digital applause. The gap between souls cannot be closed by technology. It only makes the distance more brightly lit. This leads us to the hidden psychological pattern. We confuse attention with intimacy, recognition with understanding, proximity with communion. This confusion is why loneliness continues to thrive even in our most connected age. We sedate ourselves with interaction, but like drinking salt water, the more we engage without true understanding, the thirstier we become. Does this describe the despair you sometimes feel scrolling endlessly at night? Everyone seemingly together, laughing, celebrating, while you, in your private room, feel farther and farther away. But let's go even deeper into the philosophical wound. Viktor Frankl, a man who endured the unspeakable horror of concentration camps, argued through his logotherapy that human beings can survive almost anything if they can locate meaning in it. Loneliness devastates then, not simply because it is painful, but because it threatens the foundation of meaning itself. To feel unseen is to feel irrelevant. To feel irrelevant is to question the purpose of existing at all. If no one hears you, did you even truly speak? If no one remembers you, were you ever truly here? Thus, loneliness is sharper than hunger, more destabilizing than fear, because it questions the very fabric of your humanity. At some point, buried beneath unmet social needs, the echo widens into an existential cry. Am I real without others? And here's the grim twist. Modern culture does not want you to face this question. It keeps your loneliness half distracted, half anesthetized, flooded by consumerism. Watch another show, buy another product, chase another shallow connection. Don't stop long enough to let the silence expose you. Why? Because silence is dangerous. A person who confronts their loneliness might discover truths that cannot be commodified. And a person who cannot be sedated by distraction is a person who cannot be controlled. This is why so many thinkers, from religious mystics to existential philosophers, retreated into solitude. Loneliness tears away illusions. It breaks the spell of comfort. It turns the mind inward, sharpening the blade not of despair, but of inquiry. But because the first sensation of that inquiry feels unbearable, society convinces you to suppress it rather than pursue it. So here lies the hidden problem. Loneliness is not just an emotional state, but an existential unveiling. It hurts not because you are defective or unloved, but because it exposes twin truths most cannot bear. You are fundamentally separate, and you are fundamentally free. No one can walk directly into your private consciousness. And so, you must decide what to do with the space between yourself and the world. You cannot outsource this task. You cannot scroll it away. Loneliness, then, is not a glitch, not a punishment, not even an accident. It is an ancient condition of humanity, one encoded into our very consciousness. And yet we call it an enemy and flee from it, when perhaps it was always the one thing trying to call us back to ourselves. This, though, is only the beginning. If loneliness is baked into existence, then the real question becomes, what happens when we don't acknowledge it? What happens if we keep running, keep pretending, keep patching over the void with noise and distraction? What are the unseen consequences of a society that cannot stomach the silence of solitude? That is where our journey now leads. The unseen consequences. If loneliness is indeed inscribed into the fabric of human consciousness, then fleeing from it is not neutral. Every attempt to sidestep, bury, or anesthetize it has consequences. Ripples that travel from the intimate corners of a single individual's mind to the vast structures of society. And the most unsettling part? These consequences build silently, like cracks in a foundation, only becoming obvious when the house around them has begun to collapse. Think first of the individual. When someone feels the first stirrings of loneliness, the aching recognition of their separateness, they instinctively reach for distraction. The unconscious logic is simple. If I can drown this silence in noise, perhaps I won't have to feel it. But the psychology of avoidance is merciless. What we suppress does not disappear. It mutates. Loneliness transforms into compulsive scrolling, addictive social drinking, obsessive work, or one-night encounters repeated endlessly not for intimacy, but to quiet the void for a fleeting moment. Each distraction buys a few hours reprieve while deepening the underlying hunger. Neurologically, loneliness has effects sharper than people realize. The brain, sensing disconnection, flips into a kind of survival mode. Cortisol levels rise. Sleep becomes disrupted. The immune system falters. The body, in its ancient wisdom, reads isolation as danger, an alarm meant to push us back toward connection. But if that alarm is drowned out by shallow substitutes, the system remains locked in hypervigilance. This is why chronic loneliness increases the risk of heart disease, dementia, and depression. The very biology designed to alert us becomes poison when silenced for too long. But the deeper, more hidden cost is identity itself. If you never face loneliness, you outsource the building of who you are to the reflections you receive. You become a collage of feedback loops. What employers value in you, what peers applaud, what algorithms recommend, what family expects. Without ever retreating into solitude, you risk never asking the most terrifying and necessary question. What is truly mine? Who am I apart from recognition? Avoid loneliness long enough, and one day you wake to find a stranger living inside your skin. Yet the consequences swell beyond the personal. A society unable to sit with loneliness unconsciously breeds shallow forms of togetherness. Communities become less about communion and more about consumption. Sports fandoms, celebrity obsessions, lifestyle tribes, all replacements for a deeper, harder intimacy. It's easier to stand under one banner than to stand in one's own silence. Thus, society becomes an echo chamber of lonely people, gathered together not to confront their solitude, but to drown it in noise. This is not merely poetic. History bears witness. Totalitarian regimes have long exploited loneliness. Hannah Arendt, analyzing the nature of totalitarianism, observed that isolation breeds susceptibility to ideological possession. When individuals feel irrelevant and unseen, exiled from authentic bonds, they cling with desperation to any movement that declares, "You belong to us. Your life means what we say it means." Loneliness, unaddressed, not only corrodes hearts, it fuels oppression. The crowd offers relief, even if it costs freedom. In a consumerist frame, corporations exploit this same wound. Advertising whispers, "You feel empty because you don't have this product. You feel unseen because you haven't performed this version of yourself yet." The lonely are perfect consumers because they carry a hunger that can never be permanently satisfied. Scroll long enough, buy enough, binge enough. You will always need more because the actual root has not been addressed. Loneliness becomes a bottomless pit, cleverly repackaged as market opportunity. And perhaps the cruelest irony lies in technology. Designed to connect us, it too often stages disconnection behind the polish. Cognitive scientists show that social media fosters social comparison bias, the quiet corrosion where, seeing curated images of others' joy, you feel your own solitude has grown heavier. You don't just feel lonely, you feel defective for feeling lonely. The algorithm thrives on this cycle. It amplifies the content that stirs longing or envy, because engagement is profitable. Thus, your loneliness is not only unrelieved, it is commodified. Your ache becomes data. Consider then the unseen generational effects. Children raised in a culture terrified of loneliness are silently trained that silence is dangerous, emptiness is intolerable, and boredom is failure. They are placed into endless activity: sports, school, screens, dances, internships, not merely to prepare them for life, but to keep them away from those piercing moments of solitude in which uncomfortable truths might surface. A generation never taught how to stand in its own aloneness becomes a generation easily herded into the shallowest forms of belonging. So the unseen consequences of rejecting loneliness are vast: a biological toll, a fractured identity, a consumer culture feeding off emptiness, and entire societies vulnerable to manipulation. Loneliness denied does not vanish, it metastasizes. And yet, here is the strangest twist. Buried even within these consequences lies a clue to the other side. Why is loneliness so consistently manipulable, so profoundly powerful in its influence? Because it sits at the tectonic boundary between our private and shared existence. It is the hinge on which identity, freedom, and belonging swing. If ignored, it corrodes. If numbed, it enslaves. If faced directly, however, it may do something no distraction, no ideology, no consumer product can. It may reveal the raw, unfiltered architecture of selfhood. But this direct confrontation is no comfortable exercise. It requires rebellion. Not the rebellion of political slogans or consumer choices, but something far more radical. A refusal to run anymore. A refusal to flee into noise. A willingness to confront the unbearable silence until it becomes bearable. It requires stepping into the fire of loneliness with open eyes, enduring its lessons rather than escaping them. Only then does loneliness shift from tormentor to teacher. And so our journey narrows now upon the most vital turning. How does one break free from the unconscious trap of loneliness's shadow consequences and instead transform it into the ground of personal power? How do you turn exile into initiation? To find that path, we must cross into rebellion, not against solitude, but against our refusal to face it. The rebellion, how to break free. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind you, the comfortable plains of distraction, the scrolling feeds, the second glasses of wine, the packed calendars full of motion yet empty of meaning. In front of you, open air, the raw and terrifying abyss of unmediated solitude. Most people retreat into the plains, but rebellion means stepping forward, not to fall, but to discover that in the abyss, you can grow wings. So what does rebellion against loneliness actually look like? At first glance, it sounds paradoxical. Shouldn't breaking free mean finding more people, building connections, chasing community? Isn't the whole point of escaping loneliness to stop being alone? But here is the radical twist. The rebellion begins not by running away from loneliness, but by embracing it as an arena. To break free, you must stop treating loneliness as exile and start treating it as initiation. This rebellion is not loud or glamorous. It does not consist of shouts on barricades or overnight epiphanies. It happens in quiet rooms, when the phone is turned off and the silence hisses like a tide rushing in. It happens when, instead of numbing that discomfort, you lean forward, curious, almost like a scientist studying a phenomenon. What does this ache want from me? What truth is it pointing to? Rebellion means refusing the easy path of distraction. It means noticing the trembling sense of emptiness and instead of cursing it as a punishment, asking, what part of myself am I finally being asked to meet? History and philosophy give us allies in this journey. Recall Nietzsche's assertion that true individuality requires stepping away from the herd. Rebellion is precisely that act, choosing to endure the solitude of self-definition, even when it feels unbearable, rather than dissolving into the false comfort of conformity. The greatest creators, innovators, and sages were often accused of madness, arrogance, or isolation, precisely because they walked this path. They were lonely not because they were defective, but because they were birthing visions too large to be held by the ordinary world. Consider the mystics of many traditions who retreated to deserts, forests, and caves. Their solitude was not withdrawal in defeat, but an act of ferocity. To strip the soul of every distraction, to face one's demons without mediation. This was rebellion against illusion itself. They understood something modern society has forgotten, that to inhabit the fullness of being, one must first dismantle every shallow substitute for it. But rebellion, crucially, is not meant to harden into permanent exile. Solitude is not the enemy of connection, it is its soil. Jean-Paul Sartre once quipped that hell is other people. But this was not a rejection of companionship. It was a recognition of how relationships become hell when conducted from unexamined loneliness. When we enter them, not as whole selves, but as desperate seekers of validation, we corrupt both partners. To rebel is to find yourself in solitude, so that when you return to others, you bring presence, not hunger. Here is the counterintuitive secret. The more adept you become at befriending your loneliness, the freer you are within a relationship. Why? Because you no longer enter with the silent demand, "Save me from myself." Instead, you can meet others as co-travelers, souls who can walk with you, laugh with you, even weep with you, but not carry your entire existence. You free them from the unbearable burden of being your cure, and free yourself to actually experience connection, rather than clutch it like medicine. Psychologically, this rebellion requires a shift from avoidance to awareness. Instead of reflexively filling silence, cultivate it. Instead of reflexively labeling loneliness a failure, practice reframing it as a signal, an invitation to realign with meaning. Viktor Frankl's insight here becomes crucial. Meaning is not handed down from others, but forged in response to the conditions of one's own life. Standing alone does not mean you are lost. It means you are at the forge. Loneliness is the hammer striking the metal of your being to shape it into something enduring. Practically, one might begin with small acts of solitude, choosing intentional times without digital crutches, deliberately walking without headphones, sitting quietly with your restlessness as if greeting an old visitor. At first, the silence will bite. The restless mind will chatter. But gradually, amid the noise, subtler voices emerge. Hidden desires, unacknowledged fears, forgotten joys. Loneliness, when given air, begins to reveal inner terrain obscured by busyness. Rebellion also means cultivating inner dialogues, what Jung might call the encounter with the self. Dreams, intuition, imagination, all are enriched when silence isn't drowned. Journaling, meditation, and art created only for oneself, these acts transform the space into a chamber of discovery. In this chamber, you realize a shocking truth. It is not that no one can ever join you. It is that before anyone joins you, you must first join yourself. Courage comes from here. What you feared as emptiness becomes capacity. What once felt like exile shows itself as the mountain where initiation occurs. You discover that you can be lonely and yet unbroken, untouched by the manufactured scripts of society. You begin to see loneliness not as the enemy to overcome, but as a teacher who pushes you toward the unshakable ground inside. And here is the final twist of rebellion. When you accept loneliness as a teacher, you paradoxically become less ruled by it. You are no longer desperate for constant engagement, nor anxious without it. Loneliness still visits, but now it comes like a stern tutor, not a jailer. And having befriended the solitude of your own mind, you re-enter the world with a new kind of presence, not clinging, not fleeing, but genuinely able to give and receive. This is the moment transformation becomes visible. The rebellion is not about erasing loneliness. It is about renegotiating its role, from tyrant to companion, from affliction to guide. And in that shift, life itself alters. Now one final threshold remains, for beyond rebellion lies revelation. If embracing loneliness frees you from its shadow, what timeless truth lies waiting beyond the silence? What ultimate realization does this teacher want to gift you? One so powerful it reshapes not just your relationship with others, but with reality itself. For that, we must step into the deepest chamber, where silence births its most astonishing lesson. The ultimate truth awaits. The ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. Picture this. You are alone in a room. There is no one to text, no one to call, no audience waiting for your next move. Slowly, the stillness becomes complete. At first, anxious thoughts spin like flies. What should I be doing? Why is nobody here? Am I wasting time? But then the panic exhausts itself. Silence stretches out. Something shifts. For the first time, you notice a presence you had never paid attention to before. The presence that has been with you since the beginning. yourself. This is the final, most powerful realization hidden inside loneliness. You are not missing anyone. You are missing yourself. The teacher you thought was a tormentor was actually trying to guide you to this doorway. Loneliness strips away every illusion of dependency on others, every borrowed identity, until what remains is the pure, blunt fact of your existence. And in that naked awareness lies revelation. The one relationship that anchors every other is the one you have with the being deep in your own chest. The sages and philosophers hinted at this truth across centuries. The Buddha described a path where liberation emerged, not from filling emptiness, but from recognizing the self as a hollow current of becoming and finding peace there. Mystics entered deserts to discover the divine in their own solitude. Even modern psychology acknowledges it. Authenticity, well-being, and meaning cannot be manufactured externally if the self has not been anchored internally. Loneliness, then, is not evidence that you are broken. It is proof that you are being returned to your source. It demands you answer the question most people postpone for a lifetime. Who am I, apart from applause, companionship, or recognition? Who am I when there is no mirror reflecting me? The ultimate truth is this: loneliness teaches you that you are enough. That does not mean you don't need others. That would be denial, a new mask. It means that your existence is not contingent on their constant validation. People, when they enter, become companions, co-creators, not saviors. Because you've already met the one person who will never leave you, yourself. This realization reconfigures everything. Relationships become richer because they are no longer founded on neediness, but shared abundance. Solitude becomes sweeter because it is no longer exile, but sanctuary. Success shifts too, no longer defined by how many people clap, but by how aligned your actions feel to the pulse of your own truth. But there is an even deeper layer still, one that verges on the mystical. For once you discover that you are enough, you also touch the paradoxical doorway to something greater, connection beyond individuality. How so? When loneliness is faced directly and transmuted, the tight grip on one's isolated ego begins to dissolve. You realize that beneath all the surface identities, beneath the fear of being unseen, there is a shared ground of being. What you once thought of as my loneliness becomes recognition. Every person carries this same ache, this same separation. What unites humanity, strangely, is the very thing that feels so isolating. Loneliness becomes not a private curse, but a universal bridge. Think about this with quiet seriousness. The truth you discover in facing your solitude is the very truth that allows you to encounter others more authentically. When you realize that the ground beneath your soul is the same ground beneath theirs, a new compassion emerges. You no longer look at another person as a potential medicine for your deficiency, but as another manifestation of the same mysterious existence you now embrace within yourself. This is the ultimate inversion. What once felt like death, the unbearable silence of being alone, becomes the portal through which you discover life's interconnectedness. Loneliness, your greatest dread, reveals itself as the birthplace of empathy, intimacy, and meaning. That is why loneliness is your greatest teacher, not because it comforts you, quite the opposite. It shakes the illusion that life is about constant filling. It forces you down to the root, where you must either despair or discover. And if you endure its fire long enough, you learn a lesson no one can take away. That even in silence, even in separation, you are not void. You are not unfinished. You are not abandoned. You are whole. And wholeness is contagious. From that centered ground, your very presence transforms how you enter the world. Others sense it, not as performance, but as a kind of invisible anchor. You become someone who can hold silence without panicking, sit with others' pain without fleeing, and offer love without demanding its constant return. By learning to befriend loneliness, you become the very connection so many secretly yearn for. So what now? If you carry this revelation out of theory and into the texture of your days, the practical consequences ripple quickly. That restless urge to fill every gap with chatter, noise, or distraction. Notice it and let it be. Sit, even for a few breaths, with the ache instead of rushing to cover it. Let loneliness speak. It will tell you what you've been avoiding. It will direct you toward the pieces of yourself still waiting to be reclaimed. You'll find that sometimes the ache is not about the absence of people at all, but the absence of alignment. Ways you've abandoned your own values, creativity, or inner voice in trying to conform. Loneliness is not always a craving for company. It is often a reminder to come home to yourself. And yes, after this realization, companionship still matters. Love still matters. Family, friendship, touch, community, all are vital. But they cease to be crutches propping up a fragile identity. They become extensions of a self already grounded. When you hug someone, you are not using them to reassure your existence. You are sharing an existence so fiercely felt that it longs to overflow. Here is the cinematic secret loneliness held all along. It was not punishment. It was an initiation. It wanted to strip away your illusions, break open the shell of dependency. #meta, pause, sex 0.05, and usher you into the profound realization that you are already enough. The final truth is not that loneliness vanishes. The final truth is that it transforms, from tormentor into guide, from shadow into light. So now imagine yourself in that quiet room again. The phone rests untouched. The silence thickens. But instead of dread, you feel an almost tender familiarity. The presence you once feared is no longer foreign. It is you. And in that meeting, you realize you were never truly abandoned. You were being led here, all along, to encounter the deepest teacher of your life. Loneliness, at last, bows and whispers its final lesson. I was not here to punish you. I was here to give you back to yourself.